everyone, and welcome to the Waste World podcast. My name is Stephanie Valentic, and I am editor-in-chief at waste360.com. Each week, Gage and I are joined by professionals, influencers, and experts, and community members for in-depth discussions in the world of waste. This week, we are joined by Jonathan Quinn, who is the CEO of the U.S. Plastics Pact. He has 15 years of industry experience and knowledge, and a lifelong passion for leadership in plastic packaging, and a belief in a plastic circular economy. Thank you for joining us today, Jonathan. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks, Stephanie, so much for having me. I'm really excited for the conversation and really excited to talk about all that going on with the U.S. Plastic Pact.
Oh, no, we are too. We are absolutely excited. We were just talking before we started recording here about your move from being in the industry, working with plastic, in packaging and in different segments, and then moving on to a new role, which is more advocacy, education, and that type of direction. So can you tell me, let's start off with how have you seen, in your 15 years experience, how have you seen the plastics industry change? How has it gone from just producing, and where is it going in a more circular sense?
Yeah. So I would say, I have 15 years of professional experience, but I would tell you that my exposure and what's led me to where I am today really started from the day I was born. I have pictures of me in a box of resin when I was 2. I was in the lab doing testing when I was 5. So it's really, you could say it's in my blood. But I think there's been a tremendous amount of progress within the overall plastic and plastic packaging industry and moving towards the plastic circular economy. But I think it hasn't been good enough yet. And we really need to accelerate it. And that's really what has me so excited about being in this role with leading the U.S. Plastic Pact is how can I help accelerate it? And how can I help really create and guide the pact to be very action oriented and not be necessarily an organization that's based on words, but really based on actions. And those actions, the key there is to enable a plastic circular economy. Like at the end of the day, that's all that matters to us, is that we're creating progress and driving towards that plastic circular economy, and plastic isn't looked at as waste, and really it is fueling the future and enabling things to progress forward.
So we've seen a shift legislatively where we have 6 states right now that have EPR legislation, and a lot of SB 54 just came out of California here in the past couple of years. Where has, on a governmental level, where have you seen a change in legislative wise with plastics, and where you see a more environmental focus?
Yeah, I think I just was speaking at the recycling partnership a few weeks ago, and one of the things that I talked about is how transitioning into this role has made me reflect on things. And one of the things that I reflect back on is how collectively the industry may have looked at things in legislation that we thought were crazy and we thought were misguided. But at the end of the day, a lot of the proposed legislation and a lot of legislation that is now being brought forward, it really has fueled and pushed the industry collectively, whether it's rigid or flexible, to take what was thought to be impossible to be possible. And not in every way, but in a lot of ways, that's very true. And so with regard to EPR and its impact, I think we're going to be seeing that as it happens this upcoming summer, as it goes into effect in July in one of the 6 states. But I think the big thing is how the upcoming dates are going to become more of a reality and how people are going to have to build and have to have their pathway defined. And that's really where the pact comes in and plays a key role, because at the end of the day, the CAA or the pro in most of those states, they're going to regulate. But the work that is on the front end is really the work that the pact wants to be involved in and engaged in helping to make sure that those transitions are as smooth as possible. And we're working closely with CAA, and we're going to continue to find ways to work closely with CAA to how do we help make sure that this is as seamless and as a successful of a process as possible. But I think one of the things that we can't lose sight of is how important the consumer is going to be throughout all of this. And we have to bring the consumer along, and we have to begin to get them ready for what's coming as well.
So what kind of partnerships or education is needed to kind of link the government to the producers, to the consumer, and kind of bring this full circle, for lack of a better way to say it?
Yeah, I think that's part of the work that's going on right now is what are the best ways that we can educate consumers. The consumer has been neglected for many years, I would argue, from a standpoint of the packaging and plastic producers. They've collectively, and I would lump myself into this category, collectively, we have done a tremendous job of telling each other how great we are. But we've done a horrible job of educating the consumer, and the consumer has to understand those elements of the value of material in order for them to buy into the behavior changes that they're going to have to go through in order to support EPR. Because without the consumer, there's a lot of elements that won't happen. And that's where we have to get the buy-in, and the consumer has to be prepared for some of those behavior changes that they're going to have. But it's through consumer education and getting in front of them, whether it's through marketing or media related education opportunities. Those all have to be understood and seen.
Jonathan, I'll jump in with consumer education because I'm always interested to hear what people have to say to consumers who don't recycle at all. Let's say a family of 4 doesn't recycle whatsoever, but they want to, and you're sitting in their living room. What is the first thing you can tell them to kind of get on board with recycling?
So it's a great question, and I've done a ton of consumer research, but I think to get to your question is, I mean, the future relies on it. Like our future relies on them recycling, and the future of, if it's a family of 4, there's probably 2 parents and 2 kids in that scenario, and the future of those kids is what matter. I mean, it's why I care so much about the role that I'm in. It's because of my kids. And like I said earlier, I grew up around the industry, and there's a lot of me that wants to right the wrongs of my dad and my grandfather who were in the industry, in what they didn't do as it pertains to enabling sustainability with regard to packaging. So they got to understand what's at stake, and they got to understand that they may view themselves as just one household, but all it takes is one household to create change.
I agree. It almost sounds like hey, there's no future without recycling. It's like a Terminator movie style. Like it's gonna come for us. So if you gotta recycle to stop the Terminator from coming back, you got to do it.
Yep.
And as you both mentioned, the education part is so important, because there's so much, if we're focusing just on, okay, a 9% recycling rate for plastics right now, okay, that's the number that's continually pumped out to consumers, but you're not doing, as you mentioned, Jonathan, the work on the back end to say, okay, well, here's the value of recycling, here's why it's important, and here is how it's actually done.
Right.
A lot of people don't understand the recycling process, and not a lot of, from a media standpoint, it's out there in terms of going into facilities and actually showing what comes out at the end of the process.
Yeah, and that's there's some things that we have going on right now. There's some major media outlets who are the we've been going through a number of interviews, and they're going to be highlighting the Pact, but also the plastics industry. And for many years, I've always said my dream is to get plastics and packaging on stages and in front of people that have never cared about plastics and packaging. Because that's what it's going to take, is for them to see and for them to understand the power and the value of recycling and why it's so important, and why people who do the work of the MRFs and the haulers and all those that play a role in recycling are so important to the future. And so those are some exciting things that are going to be happening in the next few months. Some major media, global media outlets highlighting the work of the Pact, which is exactly what we want, which is getting in front of people who haven't necessarily had an understanding or may have. There's a common misperception or misunderstanding that recycling is broken. And I said, I'm not going to sit here and say recycling is broken. Recycling is evolving. Recycling is growing. And the recycling system may have been designed for 40 years ago, but recycling is going through an evolution. But we have to create the demand for materials, and we have to create the demand for PCR in order for the infrastructure and all the things to all come together. And that's all happening, but it's going through an evolution, and that's what is exciting.
Exactly. I mean, that's my response to, people are asked, who are saying recycling isn't working, or it's a myth, or it's broken, is, go visit a facility, go talk to, a hauler. Yeah. Or a company, go talk to somebody who's actually in the industry and get their knowledge on it, because it's out there and it's happening. And a lot of that is about aligning objectives. U.S. Plastics Pact recently came out with the problematic and unnecessary packaging report, which is very, very interesting to read through. It addresses very interesting things that consumers could relate to, including the produce stickers. So can you tell me a little bit about, what is included in this report, and what is it really saying to consumers when we're trying to convey this message about the industry?
Yeah. So this, our problematic and unnecessary list is probably one of the most seen or most, it's one of the elements of the Pact that people pay attention to most. And that's a really important thing. So our problematic and unnecessary list is something that really is at the core of the Pact, and that's, we've got to eliminate materials that are causing issues or harm or restricting us from advancing towards that plastic circular economy. And so there's a number of materials that are on there, and I think one of the key things is making sure that there's an understanding that this list of problematic and unnecessary materials is exactly that. It's a list of problematic materials that have issues with their end of life. It is not a ban list. There's a lot of people that assume it's a ban list. That is not what this is. This is a list of materials that have an issue. And that issue could be access rates. That issue could be what happens in the collection, or that issue could be end markets and there not being a viable end market, or a number of different things. I can't necessarily, I'm not going to place a generalization, but it is ultimately an issue or it's a list of materials that have an issue. And hopefully, the hope is that it drives innovation, that it drives research and data, and that these materials can come off that list. And then they don't have to get to the point where people are moving to alternatives. But there's a lot of things that are on the list, like PFAS, for example, is one of those things that it does have health ramifications, and so we do have to move away from that. But there's things on this list like multi-material pallet wrap or stretch wrap, multi-material cereal bags, like all these things which there is an alternative, and moving to monomaterial, which is going to help feed the recycling stream and help enable PCR incorporation to increase, which all directly correlates to our roadmap circularity, which we launched earlier this year as well, which is our roadmap 2.0, which is an evolution of our initial roadmap that we brought out in 2020 or 2021. So yeah, I just want to make sure everybody hears me loud and clear on this, that our problematic and unnecessary list is not a ban list. It is a list of materials that have a issue or multiple issues, but ultimately it's about making sure that we're driving towards the cleanest and the most consistent recycling stream, so we can drive towards higher and more recycled content incorporation.
And that's such an interesting point to make, because it's about rethinking and redesign. And if you look at it that way versus an outright ban, which, you know, there's been a lot of stories and chatter about banning plastics outright. And, you know, that's something that is clearly, it's honestly not possible either. You have plastics in automobiles and things like clothing and medical use. So an outright plastic ban really isn't, you know, a be all end all solution. It's not
right.
It's going to work. It's, you know, and you being from the packaging industry, it's really interesting to hear from a rethink, redesign perspective. If we're, you know, rethinking the design of something upstream, downstream, it's going to make less of an impact. You're going to have less waste, but also you're going to be creating jobs from a, you know, from a circular economy standpoint. We're no longer throwing things in a landfill and forgetting about them. We're actually just moving things around. So we need more workers to do that. So it really makes sense for business at the end of the day.
Yeah, it does. And it does. It really is about creating more opportunities and new opportunities. I mean, if you think about 10 years ago, my job didn't exist. And the job for all the people that are a part of my team didn't exist. And so that's all part of this evolution. And if you think about the broader sustainability conversations, like how much that is created as far as jobs and opportunities for people, like that is really exciting to see. But I think the key is making sure that plastic has multiple lives, and the multiple lives of plastic will create multiple jobs and careers and opportunities for many people. And that's where it gets exciting about seeing the value of that plastic can have because of those multiple lives. And at the end of the day, to kind of circle back to your previous point, is that bans will have, and outright bans of material will have unintended financial and environmental consequences. And we have to make sure that we're looking at it all encompassing about the unintended consequences that could be created.
Absolutely. So, you know, we've already discussed EPR and the infrastructure needed to build. What are the next steps? Where do we need to go from a waste and recycling industry standpoint to help support these types of redesigns and packaging and support these types of initiatives that the U.S. Plastics Pact are behind?
Yeah. So the thing that I will say, and I that is most important, is that we need the voices of every element of the value chain at the table. And that doesn't end once it reaches the consumer, because that starts a whole nother aspect that is incredibly important. And within the Pact, we need more voices. We need to understand the hurdles and challenges that haulers are seeing. We need to understand the issues that municipalities are seeing with different materials so that we make sure we're guiding people towards making the right choices of packaging and the right choices in material selection. I went to school for packaging, so I understand why materials are being chosen, but we have to make sure that those materials are being chosen in the right application so that they're going to help towards that circular economy. But we have to understand all of those pieces, and the Pact is really driven at creating seats at the table for people that traditionally haven't had them. But all sides of the value chain have to be at a point where we're going to listen and we're going to collaborate and we're going to hear all sides of the story to create true change. And I think everybody's going to have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And at the end of the day, nothing great has come from being comfortable. And so I think that is where we're going to create this true advancement and a true opportunity.
Yeah, like you say, it's just, it's comfortable to say I can just throw something away and I don't have to think about where it goes. I know somebody else is handling it, out of sight, out of mind. People,
right.
That's behavior, in anything. So it's really interesting to hear, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about what's coming down the pipeline for the U.S. Plastics Pact in the next year here. So do you have any final thoughts or key takeaways or advice that you want to give to our listeners?
I would urge anybody who has any involvement with plastics and plastic packaging and plastics being the plastic circular economy to come be a part of the Pact. Come join us. Come enable your voice to be heard, because we need perspectives, we need ideas, we need understanding, we need data, and we need science to make sure we create progress and move things forward. I think that is, we've got to keep an open mind and an open heart to what can and what is possible.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much today for Jonathan for joining us today. For more content just like this and more information on the waste industry, stay tuned to waste360.com. Be sure to follow our podcast on Spotify and other podcast services. And remember, it's our world. Let's not waste it. Thanks for joining us.